They're not concerned about anybody else's narrative. They just want to control everybody else's. What I know about storytelling, and this is based in all of the traditional forms of storytelling, is that it is co-created. And that without your listeners' cooperation, then there's no story really getting set up here. And what we do is like we each have used the Rumi metaphor about the 5 blind men describing an elephant. And with my clients and with people I want to influence, very often what I do is I actually validate their part of the elephant first. Like, they may think it's wide, flat, and leathery. I'll talk about, I've been on situations where it was wide, flat, and leathery.
Hey everybody, I'm Ken Newhouse, and I want to welcome you to the Get Clients Now podcast, the show where high-growth consultants and professionals come to access the newest and most effective methods and systems for online marketing, advanced sales and persuasive communication strategies, and automated marketing funnels. And if you're wondering if the Get Clients Now podcast can help you get more high-value clients, enjoy more sales, build a massive tribe, and make more money, you're absolutely going to love this show.
Newhouse's work completely blows everything else that we've ever done with Google out of the water.
I have been looking for a way to grow my presence online, and what I've viewed from Newhouse's work was something that certainly is faster than anything I've seen before.
He says he's going to do something and he does it. He does it in the time frame that he says he's going to do it in. It's exciting when you talk about the results that you're going to get, and you can believe his word because he follows it up with action.
The Newhouse is direct, he's to the point, he tells you what's on his mind, and he backs his words up. From what I know now, from working with him, he's passionate about his work, and he backs it up 100%.
What I like best is you offer something that no one else has out there, which is a pretty comprehensive approach about marketing a system.
If somebody asks me, should they use Newhouse's team? Absolutely, because you're going to get the important information that you need very, very quickly.
On the internet, on the different marketing techniques, I've never experienced anything like this.
I would definitely recommend Ken Newhouse for someone who's serious about growing their business. I think that your results based on the numbers would at least double the sales in a very short time frame.
Hey everybody, Ken Newhouse here from kennewhouse.com, and I want to welcome you back to the Get Clients Now podcast, where the one-size-fits-all marketing model is dumb, the client-centric business model is king, and successful business owners and industry experts share methods that get you clients so you can accelerate brand acceptance, skyrocket your significance in the marketplace, and elevate your status, allowing you to build your tribe with certainty. Today is episode number 351 of the Get Clients Now podcast, and on today's episode, I'm going to be speaking with one of the world's leading experts on the subject of how you can influence and persuade through the art and science of storytelling. Now, I think it's fair to say that the need for me and you to be more persuasive, to be seen in the marketplace as a person of influence, has never been greater. And as a professional copywriter and marketer, it's especially important for me because I get paid significant sums of money, whether I'm writing copy or creating marketing campaigns for my businesses or the businesses of my clients, but creating ads and campaigns that persuade prospects to pull out the plastic and buy. And so if you're a member of the Get Clients Now Nation, or if you're a recent subscriber to the show, you know that over the last 12 to 14 months, I've been involved in intense research where I've actually been studying various methods of communication that can help my ads, my copywriting, and my marketing campaigns, as well as help you and your business become even more persuasive, more effective. And what I've discovered during this time is that more than any other tool, more than any other strategy or method that I've found, storytelling is without question the most effective, most powerful tool out of all of them. It's the most effective tool for getting people to literally pull out their credit card and buy what you're selling. You also know over the past 6 to 8 weeks that I've had several of the world's leading experts in storytelling, and story selling, not to be confused with storytelling, but story selling, had them on the show. And today's show, in my estimation, is going to be the pinnacle of this series. Because Annette Simmons, my guest for today, is one of the most sought after, most in-demand, highest paid storytelling consultants on the planet. And on today's show, she's going to equip you with some enormously powerful storytelling strategies. And in addition to that, she's going to explode several storytelling and persuasion myths so you can become the most effective communicator, influencer, and persuader possible. And so by improving your storytelling, communication, and persuasion skills, you can become more influential in the marketplace by instantly being seen as more credible and by developing the ability to gain people's trust early in your relationship. And so both of these skill sets are absolute requirements if you want to generate consistent sales in what I'm calling the new coronavirus economy. The level of skepticism we're now seeing in the marketplace is at an all-time high. In fact, I've never seen anything remotely close to this. Even after 9/11, Not even remotely close to what we're seeing now. Now, if you also remember, I've been running a test where I've been picking the best, most relevant questions that you guys have been submitting to us via email, and I've been answering one of those on the show in the opening monologue. You know, when I actually started this test, my goal was to be able to answer these questions in like 5 to 10 minutes, but I noticed, especially on last episode, that some of these questions cannot adequately be answered in that amount of time. So when I decide to answer a question you've submitted, my answer is going to exceed that 10-minute mark. What I'm going to do is produce a mini episode, I guess you could say, where I'll have total time freedom to provide an in-depth answer without the fear of running long and infringing on my guests' content. You know, they've invested their time to be here with us to give us just amazing information, so I'm going to be very, very respectful of that. And so if I do have a response to your question that's going to go long, what I'm going to do is make a follow-up mini episode where I cover your answer in more depth without stepping on their toes and being rude and just obnoxious and things like that. So today's question was submitted by Jeff Tyner, and Jeff is a retired internal affairs policeman. Look out, could be watching you, but Jeff actually started a consulting business. This is a business that does, from what I understand, background checks on employee prospects for small to medium-sized businesses that handle sensitive data. But I went ahead and chose Jeff's question because it dovetailed nicely with the content that Annette's going to be sharing with us today. And because I can give a detailed answer that's going to help you a lot, and I can do that in under 10 minutes, I hope. I think I can. Anyway, so here's Jeff's question. It says, back in episode number 349, you walk through a framework we can deploy that would create and heighten the level of fascination prospects and clients have with us, as opposed to being merely interested with us. When you showed us the connection between having clients and prospects that are fascinated by you and how that leads to creating lasting relationships with clients, a light went on for me. That clarified a lot for me, and I think I'm on the right track now. But near the end of your monologue, you mentioned the importance of using your personal experiences, positive and negative experiences, to help create a deeper, more fascinating personal persona. I could use a bit more clarity on this, so my question specifically is, what can I do in the way of like an exercise or whatever to create a more fascinating personal persona? I want to make use of the time that I have right now to work on this, and I guess he's alluding to the fact that most of us have a lot more time on our hands because we're not actually able to engage face-to-face with people. You know, I went back and listened to the opening monologue of that show, and Jeff is 100% right. So I did mention the importance of using personal experiences in the process of making your persona more fascinating, but I really didn't go into too much detail about how to do that. So Jeff, first of all, I want to thank you for pointing that out. Thank you for submitting your question. Everyone else, thank you for submitting your question. And again, if I didn't get to your question today, number one, it will be responded to. Give you the best answer that I can. And then also, if I didn't use your question on today's show, there's the distinct possibility that I'll be using it at one of the future shows that are coming down the road. I just want to make sure it's as relevant to the show's topic as possible when I choose a particular question and then answer it. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and dive into my answer. So based on what I've learned over the last 25 plus years as a direct marketing copywriter and marketer, what I've learned from people that I've paid significant amounts of money to over that time, and from bouncing ideas off other high-level marketers, and these are personal friends of mine, and some of these are actually even my clients, I have come to the conclusion that your personal experiences can be used as a secret source of wealth for you. And let me explain what I mean by that. The average business owner simply does not realize the vast source of wealth they can mine from their life's experiences. You know, from what I've seen and what I've learned over the years, the thought of using experiences from their past, whether it's a positive or negative experience, and use that as a way to bridge the credibility and trust gap with their prospects, with the marketplace, it simply never occurs to them. And in all honesty, it did not occur to me as well until somebody brought it to my attention. So I've learned this, I've taught this to my clients, and there's a very good chance that you know this as well. Now, let me just be very clear here about something. I'm not saying people who don't realize that they can use their personal experiences to build trust and credibility are of average intellect. What I am saying is that there are a lot of exceptionally talented people, some of them actually more talented than me, who have not recognized and deployed what I'm about to show you. And as a result, they have average businesses. Super talented people who both could and should actually be serving a much bigger portion of their market and making a lot more money aren't. And one of the reasons that I found is because they're not leveraging and using their past experiences to shape and mold their personal persona, their personal narrative, in a way that generates maximum credibility and trust in the eyes of their prospects and clients in the marketplace. Now, what appears to be happening, at least as far as I can tell, is that what they see as good experiences are often overlooked, like, hey, this is no big deal, why would anyone care? And then experiences that might be like embarrassing are often hidden away, kind of tucked away, locked away in a closet for nobody to discover. If they made a stupid mistake, like we've all done, a time when they really, really screwed up, hopefully they learned from it. If they were taken advantage of by someone they trusted, as an example, ended up losing lots and lots of money, they probably learned how to avoid and prevent that from happening in the future. In fact, they may have learned that lesson too well, and now they're gun shy about working with anyone. And I would say that they've definitely learned that these type of experiences really, really suck when they go through them. I think we've all learned that. But what these people haven't learned yet is that their experiences, these life experiences, especially the negative ones, can be used to their advantage. Listen, sharing these experiences, whether they're routine and seemingly uneventful, or they're what you and I would call glaringly obvious mistakes, using these to shape your personal narrative shows people that you're human. It makes you relatable, and by revealing these flaws to the marketplace, you're going to be instantly seen as more credible, trustworthy, and real, which is very, very important. It's incredibly important. Think about this for a minute. No matter how much money we've made, and no matter how successful we may have become, there's a pretty good chance we've made stupid mistakes in our lives. I mean, who hasn't, right? And we've all been raked over the coals at some point in our lives. So think about this scenario. Let's say that you're looking for someone who can help you get new clients right now in the heart of this coronavirus craziness. So you do your due diligence and you find someone who might be able to help you. So you decide you're going to take a closer look. But on closer inspection, you realize that this individual is presenting themselves, they're portraying themselves as perfect, as someone who's never made a mistake, as someone without flaws, no chinks in the armor, so to speak. And so you start to think about it and you ask yourself, how relatable is this person? How credible is this person? I can't speak for anybody but myself, but I've worked with enough people over the last 25 plus years to know that most of the prospects they're trying to convert into paying clients are going to look at people like this and think, this guy seems pretty smart, or this gal seems pretty smart. He seems like he's pretty successful, but he's not like me. In fact, he's not like anyone I've ever met. I can't relate to someone like this because I have screwed up. I'm looking for somebody who understands what I'm going through. I'm looking for someone who perhaps screwed up like me. Someone who screwed up and overcame it and then succeeded in the area I want to succeed in. Something in my gut doesn't feel right about this person. I think I'm going to take a pass. But you, Jeff, aren't that guy. And I know you're not that guy because you asked this question. You're playing an entirely different game on an entirely different field. First of all, you recognize that all of your experiences serve a purpose, and you also understand that you have the power. Listen, guys, you have the power to give meaning and to define your experiences. So what other people consider trash is your treasure. The stuff that your competitors are considering trash, stuff they want to keep tucked away, hidden so that no one can see it, stuff they might think is just no big deal, right? That kind of stuff can often be magnified, enhanced, and used to your advantage. Now, having said that, Jeff, my guess is that based on your question, you probably haven't actually taken the time to create an inventory, take an inventory of your life's experiences and stories. And so what I'm going to suggest is that you actually do that. And so by way of instruction, let me give you a few examples that I use from what I consider my quote-unquote asset list. So first of all, I was hit by a dump truck in a head-on collision in my Jeep, October the 4th, 1994. As a result of that accident, I nearly died. In fact, I should have died. 9 days in a coma, 18 surgeries. A year after the accident, I ended up in bankruptcy, had 2 cars and a horse trailer repossessed that same year. And so by most people, that would be considered a flaw that you don't want anyone to know about. In addition to that, I have no formal marketing education. I didn't go to college to become a marketer. So I don't have a bachelor's degree in marketing. I don't have an MBA. I don't have any of those things. I first went to college to study computer science, and from there I got a bachelor's degree in human physiology and biology, and then from there I got a graduate degree in chiropractic. So I have no formal training in marketing, in copywriting. And if most people had that in their background, they would do their best to hide that. So a lot of people would see these examples as things you want to hide and keep from public view, see them as just catastrophes that you want no one to know about. But these are things that I've turned around and I've defined the meaning for them and used them to my benefit. And here's how. Here's an example. Number 1, I overcame the humiliation of bankruptcy and went on to become one of the most successful, most profitable chiropractors in the entire chiropractic profession up until the point I retired. Number 2, the fact that I don't have a marketing or copywriting degree from an accredited college. Well, I've turned that around and used that to my advantage because I taught myself how to generate new clients on demand by studying successful marketers and copywriters. And I started with Clayton Makepeace and that story I told about mean old Joe throwing the copy of Health and Healing down on my desk and saying, Ken, learn to write like this. You'll never have to worry about money. That was my first experience with direct marketing copywriting and direct marketing. And so I use those examples to my success. I've had the good fortune of working with some of the most successful businessmen and women that I've ever met. Some of these people, only having a high school education, were some of the wealthiest people that I've ever met. They're self-taught, and they were fabulously successful and fabulously wealthy. And so what you want to do is you want to create a list. You want to take an inventory of your life's experiences and your life stories. And I've actually created a worksheet you can use to do that, to make it very, very simple to do that. Now, time constraints are going to prevent me from actually going through this exercise with you. It's a one-page worksheet. It's very simple to use and it's self-explanatory. But I'm going to go ahead and put that worksheet for you in the show notes. It's a PDF. You can download it, right? Create your own personal narrative list. It's going to help you jog your mind and get you up and running quickly with this. And you can download this PDF worksheet in the show notes, and I don't need your email address. I don't want your email address. I just want you to use the worksheet to do this exercise and start utilizing this and deploying these strategies in your marketing and your communications. And so as I wrap up my monologue and I wrap up my answer to this question, let me say this. People in the marketplace, this is really, really important, guys. This is a writer downer, or make a mental note of this. People in the marketplace absolutely need to know your origin story in order to buy the point where you are in your life, in your business. And a really good example of this is how I got to where I am now. So how did I go from having multiple clinics and generating 6 figures plus per month in cash? Last 9 years I was in practice, 100% cash at all of my locations, right? How did I go from that to becoming a direct response copywriter, marketer, and consultant to high 6 and 7 figure business owners? How did I do that? How is that possible? And so the last thing I want to say is this. Your stories, your personal narrative should be so compelling that they should lend themselves and make it easy for you to create awesome headlines. So as an example, people should hear headlines like, after being nearly killed in a head-on collision with a dump truck and being forced to retire from chiropractic, I went on to build a 7-figure marketing and consulting business, and wonder what the heck you're talking about and want to read more. All of us have to bridge the credibility and trust gap that exists between us and our prospects. And one of the best, most effective ways to do that is by leveraging and using the wealth of compelling stories and life experiences all of us have in our arsenal. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the Q&A session along with my opening monologue. If you like this sort of thing, and if you want to learn more about it, you might want to download a copy of my latest book, Sales Control, the one-page brand marketing plan for creating a tribe of ravenous clients, repeat buyers, and raving fans. And if you want to go into stuff like this a little deeper, I cover this information and other important topics in intimate detail in the Sales Control live training that's scheduled for the end of July this year in 2020. So be looking for that. And lastly, remember to download the PDF worksheet you're going to find in the show notes. The worksheet that I created that's going to help you mine those gems from your personal experiences you had over your life, your stories, and then be able to incorporate those into your personal narrative to build credibility, to build trust in the marketplace. Okay, so let's go ahead and read Annette's bio, and then we're going to go ahead and welcome her in on the show. Annette Simmons is a vibrant keynote speaker, consultant, and author of 4 books. Actually, she's working on a 5th right now, and you'll hear more about that during the interview. But anyway, The Story Factor, which is the book we're focusing on in today's interview, was named one of the best 100 best business books of all time. Another book, Whoever Tells the Best Story Wins, which is a workbook that kind of accompanies The Story Factor, another fabulous book. I have that book as well. Her 3rd book, A Safe Place for Dangerous Truth. And then her 4th book titled Territorial Games, Understanding and Ending Turf Wars at Work. Annette started with a business degree from Louisiana State University in 1983, spent 10 years in Australia in international business, attained a Master's of Education from North Carolina State in 1994, and started group process consulting in 1996. Annette is surprisingly honest, ferrets out hidden opportunities, joyfully takes risks, and yes, folks, she tells a fabulous story. And so with that, guys, if you're ready, let's roll. Hey everybody, Ken Newhouse here, and I've got Annette Simmons on the call with us today on the show. And Annette has written just a fabulous, fabulous book, as I covered in the bio. Annette, actually, you're working on a 3rd book, but you wrote a book before, The Story Factor.
Actually, I've written 4.
My bad.
4.
I apologize.
Working on the 5th.
But on behalf of myself and the members of the Get Clients Now Nation, I want to definitely welcome you to the show because, like I said just a few minutes ago, I've been really, really looking forward to having you on the show.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
It's really, I love having all my guests on, but your book really is really, really that good. So anyway, Annette, I covered your backstory, your bio and the introduction. So if you could, let's do this. Let's cover the first 2 questions that I like to ask all my guests. So if you could take a minute or two, give us your backstory. I know when we first talked, you talked about being from Louisiana, then going to Australia, but kind of give us an idea what that's about and how you became a best-selling author.
Well, I was born and raised in Shreveport, Louisiana. Now that's its own experience. The Southern patriarchy was strong with my family. Although we did have my grandmother was the matriarch, but there are all sorts of storytellers. Now, Daddy really wanted me to be as successful as I could, so he did things that would approach his definition of success, which is, increase my economic value. I did things like when I was 14, I was already typing up a resume to go find my summer jobs, I wanted to take art, and he's like, oh, no, you can't do that. You need to take mechanical drafting, And so at the time, I felt like I was a little constrained. Daddy had told me I should go to law school, and I was like, okay, that's what I'll do. But it came time after I wanted to study psychology because, my dad introduced me to psychology when I was 13 years old. He's a social worker. He would give me books. I mean, I would have been a strange teenager anyway. I studied the transactional analysis, rational motive therapy, but I wanted to study psychology in school, and he was like, oh, no, you can't do that. That's just listening to people's problems all the time. So what I did was I studied marketing because that's psychology. And unlike the other kind of psychology, if you're not good at it, you don't get to keep doing it.
That's true.
But when it came time for me to go to law school, I didn't even take the LMAT. I didn't want to go to law school, but I didn't want to tell my daddy that I didn't want to go to law school. So I moved to Australia instead. And that was what an experience. The cultures inside Australia and outside Australia, because it's anybody in Australia, if they're going to travel, they're going to go across the globe, well, no matter where they go. And the increased diversity of cultures really shook my certainties that I knew what I was talking about. And the certainties, one of them I came from America with, which was, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Metaphors teach us what our cultural values are. And I was all about, I was making my own resumes when I was 14. I was all about telling people how wonderful I was. And, that didn't work over there. They have more the collective as opposed to the individual. They have what they call the tall poppy syndrome. So you can look at other cultures and you can find their metaphors. And the tall poppy syndrome means that those that rise above the rest get. So it was a baptism by fire in collective, narratives as opposed to individual narratives. Of course, I didn't know that at the time. I just knew that they were making fun of me every time I turned around. And then went back to the United States, really returning to, if you will, psychology, but social psychology. I'm fascinated by why groups do what they do. And if you've ever sat in a meeting where you thought, these people are idiots, it's so deep, everybody really wonders why groups do what they do. They come up with different theories, but I went back to school to study the actual theories that amazingly don't change. This is stuff they discovered in the 30s, hasn't changed that much. And so the name of my company was Group Process Consulting. And everything I've done is a function of trying to figure out how people interact with each other in groups and how you create collective decision.
So those 2 points that I just want to make based on your response. Number one, that's why I don't work with corporate clients, because their groupthink and the way they do things just doesn't fit well with me. And number two, that's why I study. When I go to bookstores, I only go to used bookstores and look for old books. Talk about marketing. I loved your comment on people who, if you're a marketer, you don't continue as a marketer if you don't do a good job. And you could be a pathetic excuse for a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a social worker and still continue, because unfortunately, I think a lot of people in that career field have a lot of personal problems of their own they have never figured out.
I can guarantee you I had lots of personal problems when it came to group when I was in high school. So, you study what you need to learn. Hopefully I do a better job than the ones you're talking about, though.
Well, based on your book and just based on, as I told you before we got started, this is, I'm real careful about who I have on the show. And I do read all the books that I have on. I've had some really exceptional guests, but I have to rate your book up there within the top 5 of the best books that I've ever read. And I'm putting that up there with Breakthrough Advertising, obviously by Eugene Schwartz. Not to diminish the work that the other guests have done, but your book, for me personally, it's just that good. And I'm not saying that to, I'm not trying to build your ego or fluff up your ego. I'm just telling you the work is just really that good. It's a very, very in-depth, excellent book, and I learned a lot from it. If you could take just a minute or so, I know we talked about your mentor, but is there anybody else who's really influenced you and kind of set you off in the direction you've gone?
This is not a story I usually tell to that kind of question, but it was a pivotal point for me. The guy who invented the term process consulting is named Ed Schein. He's at MIT. And he, in 1961, did research because the Chinese communist prisoners the American prisoners of the Chinese communists, I don't know who, if you're up on your history, they actually made confessions and gave a sincere rebuttal against American culture and capitalism. Yeah. And so the book that he wrote is called Coercive Persuasion. And I was just interested, I was studying persuasion, just like how I've studied cults. How is it that they do that and how can we use it for good and not for evil, right? Well, one of the things that I found really interesting is the Chinese communists wouldn't necessarily have come with positive intentions to, make people feel more comfortable. But that's the way you persuade somebody. It's not the torture and the suffering that, cartoons tell us. It's about putting people into a group and causing them to feel like they belong in that group. Now, they were using it for, purposes I don't support. But it was the first time when I realized, oh, you know what? A lot of people have theories about how to persuade that are not based in what actually works. And his research was really pivotal for me in understanding, number one, that inclusion and group interaction is one of the best ways to get people to move to a different point of view. But the other thing is that he taught me how to do my own research. And so I have always gone straight to the source and had people tell me stories about things that really happened. And if it didn't really happen, I don't write about it, except for the folk tales. But that's a big T truth. Those things are the big T truths are true before you and I were born, and they're going to be true long after we're gone.
Yeah, they're ingrained in our DNA. They're there, the way we respond. I think Dr. Bob Cialdini talked about that in one of his books about how the Chinese would take American soldiers and not ask, they would never go for an outright confession. They would just get them to say something small. They would give them something in exchange for something very, very small that was innocuous. They weren't attacking the U.S. government. And then slowly but surely, because of the principle of consistency, they couldn't go back against what they said. And so eventually they would work them into the point of giving a full-blown.
I would say the principle of group peer pressure too. They use group process specifically to allow people. That's my second book, A Safe Place for Dangerous Truth. One of the things that you're saying, you don't work with corporate. I go into a corporate situation when they're at an impasse and they're ready to just, throw up their hands and give up. And I facilitate a dialogue, and there's always some dangerous truth that most of the people in the room know that the leader is pretending like isn't true, and that they even talk about after their meetings, their staff meetings. They go in the bathroom, they check for feet. So when we bring a group to a level of trust, you end up finding out things that maybe are going to cause you problems, but they're absolutely necessary for moving forward. And helping people tell their story, even though they may be a little afraid to do that, is one way to build trust.
Okay. So let's do this. I'm going to jump ahead in your book, you added 2 new chapters. This is the 3rd revision of your book. The last 2 chapters are completely, I mean, there's a lot of new content in the book, but the last 2 chapters are brand new, like everything about them's new. So my first question comes from chapter 11. You mentioned your mentor, his definition of story, but I really I felt much more comfortable working with your definition of story. So if you could, let's talk about, and I do have a lot of questions. I got like 15 questions. So keeping that in mind with this, I want to get to as many as I can.
I'll shorten my answers. Sorry.
No, actually, that was me saying the Chinese gave little things. They got little concessions. I wasn't telling you to shorten up. I was saying the Chinese gave little concessions because I thought that's the reference. That's the research you were going to reference. I didn't know about that particular research you were referencing, but yeah, you guys, you can't see we're on video here, so I'm giving hand signals. Normally, I'll just do a pattern interrupt if somebody's going long, and I'll just use their name or something. And I try not to be rude, especially if they're onto something. I'm just going to let them go. But no, I have like 14 questions, so I wanted to try to roll those out if we could. But if we don't, whatever you give us is whatever you give us. I'm just thankful that you're here. So, what is a story, and what is it's not? What it's not, and then here's my trailer on that. Why stories and the art of storytelling are so critically important. And this is a business podcast in the business setting to being able to influence people. And obviously we're talking about ethical influence and ethical persuasion. This is not about how to manipulate anyone. That's one of the things I really loved about your book. I mean, you go out of your way to point that out. And that's why so many people are failing today, is because it's very one-sided. You talked about push-pull, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But what a story is, what it's not.
Story for me is a significant emotional experience. So experience is the best teacher, right? I mean, you put somebody in a situation, they learn patience the hard way, and that's the best teacher. Well, patience is one of the things that's hard to teach, particularly when you have a client that's impatient for you to produce, turn it around, all that sort of stuff. And so in a way, we're actually in helping our clients become more satisfied, we're giving them some teaching on patience. So patience is something that experience is the best teacher. The second best teacher is story, because it's a simulated experience, and it's from a point of view where I'm not telling you what to think. I am, with your cooperation, you bring up in your imagination. For instance, the conversation I had with my father after I told him I was going to Australia, which, it's amazing that you can actually, when you bring in these sensory experiences, people will add all the other ones in, and they get more and more engaged and more connected. And so what we do is we give people a chance to have a real simulated experience, whereas opposed to just telling them our opinions. We take them through A, B, C, D, E, and then they come to the same opinion we came to.
That to me is just fascinating. And I know you talk, I think it's chapter maybe 12, chapter 11, you talk about our responsibility in storytelling, because to be able to wield that power, and really, if you're a master storyteller, you're wielding some heavy duty, influential power over other people. That there's,
Well, it depends on how you approach storytelling. If you approach storytelling as power over, then what you're going to do is you're going to take your narrative. These are the people that use the term control the narrative. They're not concerned about anybody else's narrative. They just want to control everybody else's. What I know about storytelling, and this is based in all of the traditional forms of storytelling, is that it is co-created. And that without your listeners' cooperation, then there's no story really getting set up here. And what we do is, like, we each have used the Rumi metaphor about the 5 blind men describing an elephant. And with my clients and with people I want to influence, very often what I do is I actually validate their part of the elephant first. Like, they may think it's wide, flat, and leathery. I'll talk about, I've been on situations where it was wide, flat, and leathery. And then you earn the right to get them to walk through a little field trip of what you have seen. And that's what I call the I know what you're thinking story. So it's a balance of going back and forth. Storytelling is never just the telling, at least not the way I teach it.
Right. So my point, and you're exactly, I mean, I couldn't have said it. Obviously, there's no way I could have said it better. But my point was in saying that is that some people look to learn the art of storytelling so that they can just bowl through people and get what they want without considering what's really the fact they're dealing with another human being on the other end of this. So, and I think you kind of pointed that out, that we have a responsibility. If you learn how to do this, don't take advantage of people with this. Because again, if the listener's not engaged and they're not participating, you're really just talking at them versus actually sharing a story with them. And to me, it's just fascinating that you could literally, through story, through this communication method, pull someone into a world that's not entirely 100% fantasy, but it's not physical, tangible, but you can still...
It's imagined.
Right. And you can bring them there along with you, even though their interpretation, their environment of that story may look completely different than yours. You're able to bring them out of the state they're in and move them to another place in order to communicate with them. And I just think that is just, when you stop and think about that, it is just incredible to be able to do that versus trying to be persuasive. You know, I write a lot of copy. This is going to make my copy a lot more effective in so many ways. And it's going to leave my people that are reading my copy feeling a lot better about the fact that they just read my copy if I can get this right. So why is storytelling so important in business, you think, today? And I know there's a lot of answers to that. I know we've got technology. People are more connected, yet more distant, they feel lonelier than ever. Why is story, if you're going to be successful in business, so important today to your success?
Well, I think right now, it's statistically proven that trust is going down precipitously. Was going down precipitously before this pandemic, and certainly isn't improving right now. So what people are craving more than anything, they don't want your information. They don't want your so-called solutions. What they want is faith. They want faith that you're a good person. They want faith that if they spend their money with you, that they'll be glad they did. And when you are the kind of person that's your end goal as well, then they have to decide whether you're a trustworthy person or not. And you cannot, in any circumstance, come out and say, "Hi, my name is Annette, and I'm trustworthy." Because they're going to want to make that decision for themselves. And so this is the where I always start people off with their who I am, why I'm here story. Because that story, we tend to go into, our product and the benefits and all that sort of stuff. But until we've established a relationship where they've decided that they trust us, then there's no bandwidth across which our information can flow. There's nothing that will create trust other than an experience, a firsthand experience, or some story of an experience where you have actually come through. And so when you tell a story about a time when you screwed up and then you fixed it, or when you tell a story about a time when you lost money making it right for a customer, when you tell a story about a mentor who taught you about respect, then what happens is that the listener decides, okay, I'm going to give this guy a chance. And that's what builds the bridge across which your new information can flow.
Okay, and so speaking of the 6 different types of stories, let's go through this in rapid fire succession, just because... Guys, let me just do my own commercial for you, Annette, right now. I do it from time to time. I did it with a couple books over the last couple weeks, which normally I don't do that often, but I'm going to guarantee her book. Guys, buy this book on Audible, the audio version. Listen to the book. You will say that this is one of the best books you've ever bought. She does a fabulous job of narration. You're going to get so much out of this book. And if you can't say that, if you can't email me and say, "Ken, you just nailed it. This is absolutely phenomenal. Annette is a genius. You were right again." If you can't say that, email me, customerservice@kennewhouse.com. I will pay you for the book. And obviously it's an Audible book, so you can't send me the book. But I'm going to guarantee your book. It's that good. But having said that, because I want people to read this book, obviously, and because of the time constraints of a podcast, we can't go into depth with a lot of these questions, although we could talk all day. Literally, we could. I'm I could wear you down. I could take you that deep in the interview. But let's run through these stories in just like rapid fire succession. So I'll just name the first one, and then you talk about it for like a minute or so, when we would use it.
Well, I can do that. The Who I Am story is the story that I was just talking about, where you want someone to have faith in you. You want somebody to lean in, to be curious about what you have to say. Perhaps you've done something that they've, that is meaningful to them. When you can tell a little story like that, what happens is that you establish faith. The second part, and this all comes from my understanding of group process and how people decide to work together or not, is why are you here? Because if you were there just to exploit your customers, then they're not interested. And frankly, as far as I'm concerned, you don't deserve their attention. If you're there to really make their lives better, then be honest about that. What is it that caused you to go into the business you're in? It's certainly not just that you wanted to sit there with headphones in front of a whiteboard and a microphone. No, that's not what you're about. What you're about is you're about helping people reach their potential. Tell a story that illustrates that, and then they understand why you're here. Now, at that point, if you're going to continue, they need to understand what your vision is. And when we go into business situations, very often the frustrations of actually getting something done, the daily grind, people aren't paying attention to the end goal. And so a vision story builds in their imagination that end goal, and it juxtaposes and shrinks the daily frustrations in comparison with the vision. So that's your vision story. Then there are value and action stories, and people want to know what your values are. They're going to assume that you, it's just natural, particularly now, for people to be cautionary. They're going to assume maybe your value is to just make as much money as you can, or when you tell a story about your values, for instance, what we've been talking about in terms of creating some sort of moral, social responsibility, which is really important right now. It's not like business is going to survive if we have a failure in our society of morals. I mean, it's business's interest to invest. And by morals, I'm talking about simply kindness and generosity. Each one of those things, I can say the word generosity, or I can talk about trust. But when I tell you the story about being in India and actually prepaying for a carpet 2 weeks before I came back through Mumbai to get it, and finding that this guy went above and beyond. And people will sometimes think, well, that was stupid. You don't pay for, something before you actually get it. I demonstrated trust. So that I always run experiments about trust. And so that's a value in action story. And then there's the teaching story. There are things, for instance, when I teach storytelling, I know what the problems are going to be from the very beginning. People are like, I want to convince someone to believe in this. And so they're outside of the story. Well, when you can, and I use this example of Jesus being cornered by saying, the Pharisees saying, isn't it against the law to heal on the Sabbath? He said, well, if your ox fell into a well, which was already covered by Jewish law, you'd get him out. And so what for me that teaching story does is it teaches you that you need to actually get inside the problem. You can't find a good story if you're going to be from the outside looking in. And the last one, which is I know what you're thinking story, we know what objections people are going to have. And if we can give voice to those objections in a story that illustrates that we validate, that makes a lot of sense to us, and that in this case, you don't have to worry about me exploiting you. None of those words in their technical veracity hold. But when you tell a story, I do a lot of diversity work. And one of my jobs is to tell a story that demonstrates that I have been in the trenches. I understand what white privilege is. And when I do that, then people are willing to listen to what I have to say next. So that's the 6 stories: who I am, why I'm here, vision, value in action, teaching stories, and I know what you're thinking stories.
And let me just add something to that. You talked about that last one, I know what you're thinking stories. You mentioned, if I understood it correctly, if I'm remembering this correctly, until you develop a certain level of skill with this, you probably should rely more on stories that you've actually lived and experienced versus trying to create your own story out of thin air to meet this criteria. I know what you're thinking stories, or any of the stories actually.
I am 100% against creating stories that didn't happen.
Okay, so then I misunderstood then. So so you don't want us to do that at all, obviously.
At all, ever.
I don't know how you could do that. Yeah, I don't know how you could do that, even if you weren't trying to manipulate someone, because how do you see something? I don't know how to do it. How would you be able to see in your own mind's eye something that never happened?
Well, people do that all the time. They see themselves as being the smartest person in the room, and that never happened.
They're delusional.
So, well, desire can impact what people will make up stories, and the term that triggers is, well, it could have happened. My point is it didn't. And that was something you wish had happened that would then create a pat example of a story that you want to then tell someone. The deal is that you are then misleading them because you're talking about something that's unrealistic. It may sound like a good story to you, but if it didn't happen, it's not true. And if you force yourself, and it's a small discipline, you force yourself always to think of find a true story. What happens is that your stories are deeper. They're more relatable. You end up with little surprises in there that are delightful to people. And it's just a good idea because they're better stories.
And then in addition to that, something else that I don't think was directly connected, but something I picked up from the book is that you mentioned that, if you enter into a storytelling situation with a prospective client or whoever you're talking to, and you're feeling depressed or down or uncertain, that's going to make your story much less impactful. And so at least in my opinion, if you're telling a story that you fabricated out of thin air to try to sell something to someone or persuade someone, I think there's a real good chance that disingenuousness is going to come through
absolutely
on a subconscious level in your story, as opposed to actually telling something that really happened. Like, I was really hit head on by a dump truck and almost died. I mean, that's 100%. I mean, there's no embellishment. Everything about that story. I mean, Mean Old Dan told me to embellish the story a million different ways, which I don't need to, because it's just a remarkable. The fact that I'm even alive is just by the grace of God. And just even when I stop and think about it, I shouldn't be here. I should not be here, let alone in the shape that I'm in. And so it's a story I can tell I get excited when I tell it because I have children. I had a son then, but I would have never had my 2 daughters. Right. I would have never had all the joy and, the life experiences with my wife and all the other things. And so, so it would seem that. So let's do this, Anna, if you don't mind. I wrote some quotes down from the book. So I'm going to read the quote, and then I just want you to give me your gut visceral response on it and take a couple, 2 or 3 minutes.
This is fun. Thanks.
Okay, so here's the first quote. It says, "A good story helps you influence the interpretation people give to facts. Facts aren't influential until they mean something to someone." Well,
we can take all the facts. You can look at COVID-19 right now, and people are taking facts, cherry picking them and making it mean whatever it is that they want it to mean. For instance, there's a lot of talk about female versus male narratives right now. When you have a particular narrative, and so the female leaders, I'll just say, have less of a war narrative. What happens is that they have the same facts, but your story brings some facts to the foreground and pushes some facts to the background. If you have a war narrative, that's all you see, is you're looking at oppositional, adversarial, whatever. But if you have a collective survival narrative, then all of a sudden you take this information, you put it into different slots, and it means different things.
Okay. And so here's the next one. Facts are neutral, unlike human beings. Wait a minute. Let me read that again so I can sound correct when I sound. Facts are neutral, unlike human beings. I know I wrote this word for word. Facts are neutral. Unlike human beings, add their own meanings to those facts. Something doesn't sound right. But anyway, I'm going to read this anyway. People make decisions based on what those facts mean according to their story, not on the facts themselves. I know I wrote that down right, but something just about the inflection of the way I'm reading it doesn't sound right. But are you following the question?
So what happens when, say it again?
Facts are neutral, unlike human beings. I messed that up. But essentially, you talked about how facts really don't have meaning to them. The meaning that people, let's say I'm telling you a bunch of facts. Well, I may have my perception of the facts, but you're going to put a different spin on those facts based on the story you're telling yourself or your own story.
Well, we're looking at divisions, and the fact is that I walk into a room and I'm wearing a mask, right? And so there's people who are going to say, well, that means that you're a panic monger and you're trying to get other people to be scared when really there's no need to be that scared. Or, wow, she really is doing the right thing and trying to model for other people what the right thing is. The fact that I was wearing a mask is neutral. But the story that people are telling themselves about each other right now are all over the place.
Can I tell you that I'm thinking Annette's going deep here. She's going really deep here. I'm thinking she's got some sort of, she's from New Orleans. She's from Louisiana. So maybe this is like a Mardi Gras mask. And then it dawns on me almost at the end here, you're talking about a COVID mask. Yes. My sister's an ER doctor. So I'm just sitting here. I'm not even thinking about this is a COVID-19 story. And yes, that's exactly what it is. So I feel kind of like a dummy.
Hang on just a second. That's hilarious because, hang on. I actually do happen to have a Mardi Gras mask right here.
And I've got a COVID mask right here. So that's funny.
Right. And so that was an example of what we were trying to share with your listeners, which is that you have the mask was a neutral fact.
Yes.
And we interpret based on whatever narrative we're running at the time.
Yep. My narrative was, hey, this is a deep thing from the book, and you're thinking just superficial, easy to understand, easy to follow story from COVID. All right. So here's the next one I want to cover. And this one really stuck out to me. And this is not something you said, but you put it in the book. And it struck me so much that I'm going to put it on my wall. I'm going to have it made into a nice poster and frame it and stick it right in front of my monitor. Is this big, gigantic monitor. So my camera has to be off to the side, my video camera. But I want to put it on the wall where I can see it. It's the quote from Cicero. And Cicero's quote was, "If you wish to persuade me, you must speak my words, think my thoughts, and feel my feelings." And so not to oversimplify that, but what are some of the steps we can take to better understand? People say this is what you need to do, but oftentimes we're unsure how to do it. So as an example, talking to Lisa Cron last week, she said something similar. I'm like, well, okay, how do you do that? And then she asked me, okay, well, Ken, how would you do it? Because I'm working on this new project and I want to get your feedback and your input because I need to better understand my target market so I can bring them in and sell more of my books. So I worked through some stuff with her on that. But how would you suggest that we can come to a better understanding? What are some steps we can take? I mean, you're a marketer. You understand this, but what are some concrete things we can do?
For me, the most valuable thing that I use when I'm teaching storytelling is that I draw people's attention to the fact that there are a finite number of universal experiences we all have as a human. Every single one of us has been betrayed. Every single one of us has betrayed someone else. Every single one of us has been forgiven when we didn't deserve it. And so if I tell you a story about the time when I was forgiven and I didn't deserve it, you'll recognize that universal experience. It's part of the human experience. And then I go on to say everybody's fallen in love and everybody has been dumped. And if you haven't, we're not interested. But these universal human experiences are a great way to get inside the head of any human being. And when I use storytelling, when I teach storytelling, I guide people to make sure they're telling a story that's universal, because what happens is that Tolstoy's definition of art is when you take a feeling, an emotion that you've had before. Remember, my definition is significant emotional experiences. And through either dance or paint or storytelling, you recreate that emotion in someone else. And so we tend to, in business, think that emotion means that we're making bad decisions. But emotion means that we're tuning in to the same desires and fears. And when we do that, I think we have a much better chance of helping this person experience us as knowing something that they know is true. So when you tell, and that's a different level of truth, a big T truth, that,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. So let me look at my next question here, and I'm trying to look at the clock as well to manage this as best I can. Here's the next quote you said. Okay. First, my little blurb ahead of it, then your quote. When you consciously tell people a story about who you are, and then here's your quote. The people whose attention you seek filter your story through their interpretations of what they see and hear as you speak. So why is that important for us as people who are looking to persuade through story? Why is that important for us to understand that?
Well, so often we think we know what should influence people. And if it's not working, we just do it harder and more often. And the truth is that we have to pay attention to what's working. And if you are in tune with where someone's at and interpreting their story, you're going to see in their eyes or hear in the tone of their voice that they're coming to a slightly different conclusion. My goal with storytelling is to pay attention to that. And at that point, they're coming to a different conclusion than what I'm coming to. I ask them to tell me a story. And that's how I learn about my customers. That's
really good. I mean, that's so simple and straightforward that I didn't even consider that, but that's excellent. That's really good.
It
wow.
works, and it's so much fun. And they're delighted, to have a chance to speak.
So you would say something like, tell me a story about X, or tell me a story about a time when...
I usually don't use the word story because that can cause people to panic. I'll say, tell me more about that, or who was it that taught you that, or is there an example in your past where that was really brought home for you?
Yeah, because we naturally communicate in story. I mean, it's that they're going to do that.
They're going to share a story.
Okay, so here's another quote, and let me just say this because I forgot to do it at the beginning. I ask every one of my guests, and I'm going to ask your permission at the end. Could I get your feedback on the show, for a minute or two? It's like a 2-minute process because I want to be better at what I do. Okay, and then I'll ask you a hard question. What's the one thing I need to do better? I can improve on. So, and don't pull your punches at the end. I mean, don't eviscerate me, but just tell me straightforward whatever you think I could do better, because I want to make this a great experience, not only for the listeners but for the guests that I have on. Okay, here's number 11. My next question. It says the goal of an influential story is to connect your prospects' momentum to your goals. So assuming we've invested, and that was your quote, now here's what I wrote. So assuming we've invested the time to truly understand our prospects' desires, which again, I think most people don't.
Right.
Because they haven't peeled enough layers of the onion back. You talked about that in the book, and that's kind of a marketing thing. I want the $1 million deal, right? Well, why do you want the $1 million? And so if we peeled that onion back deeper, we'd understand what the motivation is. It's not the million they want, it's all the things they get from the million. But what does it mean to, here's your quote, connect your prospects' momentum to your goals? What does that mean, and how do we do that?
And let me just make it real simple. Everybody shares the same momentum of wanting to have more faith right now. You can say, having more faith that you're going to perform, having more faith that you're dealing with someone who's ethical, having more faith. But in order to make it simple, what I have to do is I have to figure out what it is that causes you to lean forward and want to engage. That's my job. And I do that by asking you to share stories with me. I do that by doing my research before I even get on the phone with you. If I can possibly find out any articles you've written that I can then connect with and say, wow, so your theory about such and such is sort of the same as what I'm working on. Can you help me figure this out? What we do is we have to do our homework. And sometimes if you're just, you only have that 7 seconds first impression, what are you doing with the first 7 seconds? Are you asking somebody to tell you a story? Are you demonstrating that you're interested in their well-being as a human being? A lot of people on these Zoom calls, man, we cannot stop the process of checking in and making sure everybody else is okay, nor should we. I think there's some business strategists that are like, that's wasted time. That's part of the human process. And so when I demonstrate that I understand that this checking in process is just as important as the business stuff, then the person who is observing me and deciding whether they want to interact with me or not gets a chance to say whether, okay, this is the sort of thing I care about too. And that's their momentum. Their momentum, everybody's momentum is to feel more alive and more connected. I mean, that's we're pretty safe on that one.
And you actually go into the book, you talk about that in great depth in the book, which those are some of the questions we're not going to have time to get to, but really, I was just really fascinated, not to interrupt you, but I just wanted to throw that in, guys. Just a lot of content on that particular subject. And that's one of the things that really spoke to me in the book. So I'm sorry, please finish.
No, that's okay. I did.
Okay. Sometimes I'll just blurt out. I apologize, but I think that's from my head injuries. There are times when I will literally forget what I'm talking about.
I take it as a compliment. It means you're engaged with the information, and it keeps me engaged too.
I appreciate that. Okay, I'll ask you one more question. You doing okay on time? You got like 5 or 6 more minutes?
Yes.
Okay. Let me see here. Which one do I want to ask you? Okay, I think I'll ask this one. Here's your quote. Before you influence, you must establish some connection. Story builds connections between you and the person you're trying to influence. And then here's my follow-up question. Give an example of the types of stories we can tell to help us establish more and deeper connections with our prospects. And I know that would probably be the 6 you gave, but is there anything else that might come to mind?
Actually, I'm gonna come from left field for this. It's a story about when I was working with PricewaterhouseCoopers, and we were teaching storytelling. And this is like 15, 20 years ago. And the thing with teaching storytelling is that nobody wants to go first, because when I teach storytelling, I actually have to have them telling their stories, so that I'm not bringing, I'm not messing it up with my perspective. They need to see. And it's always hard for the first person to get up and tell. There's this long silence. I'm like, so who's going to volunteer? And the CEO at the time jumped up and said, I'll tell a story. And so he told this story about being in a hotel room, and the day was over, and he was going to watch his football game, and he ordered a cheeseburger and 2 beers, and he was so excited. And so he's finished with his hamburger. It's halftime, so he goes to put the tray outside, and one of the beer bottles falls over. So he reaches to get it, and then he hears the click. And he's in his underwear. He's in his tighty whities. And so he's like, well, he finds a plant to get behind. And then he thinks, well, I'm just going to make a run for it. So he goes in the elevator. There's nobody there. He understands when the doors open that time is not his friend here. So
the click was the door shut on him. He got locked out of his, okay.
Yes. So he runs across the lobby, and they see him coming. They say, what number? and he tells them the number, and they have the card key, and he gets the key, and he goes back up the elevator, and he gets into his hotel room finally, and he's huffing and puffing, and the phone rings, and it's the front desk. And she says, next time, just, there are phones on every floor. And you can call us and we'll bring you a key. So that's an example of all of us have locked ourselves out of something. And we're like, oh no, here we go. So that's a shared universal experience. And what he did was he took an embarrassing experience, which he illustrates vulnerability first. And trust is a dance whereby we show trust and we have to go first. And so when we take these stories and we can share something that's a universal experience, and like I said, being embarrassed, being proud of yourself, being disappointed in yourself, all of these things, when told from an authentic place, are something that other people recognize and they connect.
That was a really good story. Okay, so I told you that was my last question, but this is genuinely my last question. Then I'll get your feedback, if I may. What's the one question today that I should have asked, but I didn't?
Maybe where do we find stories? Because I have the 4 buckets where you find stories. I think it's a shortcut. That it's a time you shined. It's a time you blew it. It's a mentor, or you can actually lift a story from a book or a movie by an artist, someone who really captures big T truth. Fiction is a wonderful way to lift. Have Scorsese pay for your special effects, and then remember one of the stories that has now become its own PowerPoint slide from The Matrix is, do you want the blue pill or the red pill?
It's my favorite movie of all time.
Isn't it awesome?
Yes, it is.
So, and of course, now we're aging out. The young people are like, what?
What's that movie? Who's that? Who's
yeah,
Keanu
but
Reeves?
if you describe Neo as standing there, and he could go down the rabbit hole or whatever. So that would be it, like where to find stories. So that's my little shortcut hint.
Well, thank you so much. Let's do this. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. This was a fabulous interview. I really enjoyed it. How can we find out more about you? I mean, obviously, we can go to Audible and buy your book. Tell me the title of your book in full. It's not just the story factor. There's more to it. Tell us the whole title of your book.
The Story Factor: Influence, Inspiration, and Persuasion. And then there's also Whoever Tells the Best Story Wins, which is a book I wrote that's under the HarperCollins, and that is more of a workbook. That is, I don't know if you've seen it yet, but I read it. Okay, so that takes you through the 6 kinds of stories for each of these 4 buckets, and there's something about having stories that causes you to come up with your own stories. And hearing a story. So I put my own stories in there and stories that I got from other people. And it's just one of those things that triggers. Because, like, if I was to ask you where you were on September 11th, or if I was to tell you about the time that I got hit by a truck, we immediately have to share each other's stories. That's just a human need. And so that's the last thing I have to say.
Okay, and so guys, I'll do this. If you buy her book on Audible and then you buy the previous book, tell us the name of that title again.
Whoever Tells the Best Story Wins.
I've read that book. I actually read that book before I read this one, and that's obviously because it came out first. But I'll guarantee that book as well, but you got to buy the Audible version first, or with it, for that to work. So what about your website? What's your website, Annette?
AnnetteSimmons.com.
SIMMONS.com.
And right now I'm working on a new set of stories in terms of what are female narratives about power and what are male narratives about power and how we can better balance those. Okay. And so that'll be coming out approximately next year, and who knows whether, it will ever come out with everything up in the air. We'll see, but I'll look forward to that book. So again, thank you so much for being on the show. And I know it's going to be very well received. It was just a really good interview. You do a really good job. I really appreciate your time. I did. And really a fabulous book. It's just really, really a great book. And obviously, thank you. I'm going to have to reread this book like a bazillion more times to really get the most out of it. It's really deep. It is. Really good stuff. Thank you. I really appreciate it. That really cheers me up for today. You did. So you've done a wonderful work. But anyway, listen, I'm going to wrap it up, and then I'll email you links and things like that, and we'll go from there. All right. Well, you take care and have a good day. You too. Stay safe. Thanks. All right. Bye-bye. Okay. Bye-bye.
Our objective with this podcast is to help you and your business stand out in the marketplace by crystallizing your messaging, marketing, and communications. On behalf of the whole Ken Newhouse team, thanks for listening.